Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
From New York City, it's Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast. Today, I'm your host, Kaustubha Das. We're missing our dear friend and co-host Raghunath, who has been sick off and on, and he's back off again. So he won't be with us today, but we do have a very special guest. We have Jai Jagannath, who we've had on the show before. Jai Jagannath, welcome to Wisdom of the Sages.
Thank you. I'm feeling a little embarrassed. I'm sorry that you guys have to tolerate me for the hour, but thank you.
Come on, man. We'd love to have you on. We love to have you. And, Jai Jagannath, he's my friend. He's coming live from the Bhakti Center where he's currently living and serving. And Jai Jagannath is, he's a Bhagavatam man. He loves to read it, studies it. He's a philosopher. He gets into it. And we always love to hear his insights. So welcome. It's walk on. I just realized it's walk on Wednesday. I've been traveling and moving around so much, and things have been so weird that I forget what day it is. But Mara, it is Wednesday, isn't it, Mara? Help me with that.
Yeah, it is Wednesday.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So then it'll just be a big walk on Wednesday. Jai Jagannath will just walk on and stay on today. Mara, anything that we need to announce today?
There's a couple Bhakti Recovery Group meetings today. There's one at 1 o'clock and a women's Bhakti Recovery Group meeting tonight at 9:30 p.m.
Okay. So is the first one just for men, or is that for anybody?
The first one is for everybody.
Okay. And then what happened to the men's? That's on a Tuesday.
That was yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we got Bhakti Recovery Groups, and we got Jamuna Jai doing something this week?
Jamuna Jai is doing an asana class for our Patreon members on Friday, her Fun Day Friday class at 5:30 p.m.
For Patreon members. And what's one become a Patreon member?
Go to www.patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
And you get stuff. You know what everybody got yesterday?
What was it? A talk you sent out?
I put, this talk I did over the weekend up at that chant camp in Northern California, where I gave a kind of informal discussion, but I started talking about the story from the Twilight Zone. So it's lessons from the Twilight Zone. And so you can check that out. I think it's about an hour-long talk, and maybe this week or next week there'll be another talk that we'll put up. So Patreon members, you can go check that out. That'll keep you going until Raghunath gets back up on his feet and does some Sweet Baby Krishnas, right?
Great.
Okay. So I think that's it for now. Why don't we jump right into it? Jai Jagannath, would you like to chant our opening shlokas, Narayana Namaskritya and all that?
I don't know which ones you can do it. I don't know which ones you do. So
okay, we just do the standard. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasvatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayana, unto Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. When you pick up your Bhagavatam and read it, Jai Jagannath, do you offer obeisances to Mother Saraswati?
I try to.
Okay. Not every time. Sometimes we forget.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting, right? That we reach out to the Devas as well, the Devis, when we're reading Bhagavatam. Anasta Pareshva Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Jnanatimarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual masters have opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto them. Okay, so let's summarize just a little bit. We are now kind of like in the final section. There's still quite a few maybe 6 or so chapters left in the third canto, but we're getting to like, in a sense, what many of the chapters have been building up to. Sometimes it's called Devahuti, Kapila Samvada, the conversation, the discussion that takes place between Devahuti, she was a princess, but she was also a great yogini, and her son, who is an incarnation or avatar of Lord Vishnu, and they are discussing the real important stuff that people are meant to discuss. I know that you've coined this phrase about inquiry, Jai Jagannath. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
What did that you say?
I really pride myself on that discovery in 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, evolution of inquiry precedes evolution of being.
Evolution. This is a takeaway. Mara, please note this one down. Evolution of inquiry precedes
evolution of being.
Right. So in other words, where we go in life, how we evolve,
the
is
questions
largely
determine
connected.
the questions determine the trajectory. If I'm asking questions about Game of Thrones, you're going to get certain answers to those questions, but probably not the sort of answers that you can transform yourself with. If you're asking questions about, let's say, God, then you're going to get certain answers or a certain knowledge that allows you to transform your being. So evolution of inquiry.
Right.
Our questions have to evolve. We can't keep asking only about the empirical world, whether it's Netflix or it's political issues or it's things of this world. That's one level of inquiry. But if we're trying to penetrate into the spiritual or transcendent, then our questions have to reach to that realm also. And kind of like a seek and you shall find, knocking and doors shall be open, ask and it shall be given unto you sort of thing.
Okay. There are other similar references out there. And even if you're inquiring about God, the level of that inquiry is important too. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so here, the inquiry coming from Devahuti is interesting because she's such an interesting character because she was this princess, right? She's the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, who's like, not just like a king, but like a universal, like practically within the universe, he was like the leader of it. And so she's living in great opulence and she knows the life of a princess. But even from that youth, she was interested in yoga. So when she was thinking, who do I want to marry? She had heard about this Kardama Muni, who was like, he didn't offer the kind of opulences that she was used to living with. He was living, on the bank of this lake, just kind of like as a penniless yogi, but it was his qualities that she appreciated. And so when it was time for her to marry, her father said, who do you want to marry? And they both decided that this was a great candidate. She was attracted to him, and the father felt that he was, even though he was a penniless yogi, because his qualities were so elevated, that he would make a great husband for his daughter. So he brought her out there, to the lake, and she married him and accepted his world, accepted his lifestyle, accepted the simplicity and all. But he wasn't just a penniless. She gave up all that opulence and served him like with a lot of self-sacrifice. And after years of that, he wanted to satisfy her in every way, satisfy her by giving her children, as well as just like fully materially. And he manifested, with his yogic power, he manifested this kind of like beautiful, it's hard to describe, but like a kind of like a spaceship. And they were just traveling around and enjoying life for a long time. And then it was time for him. He said that when we get married, I'm gonna give you children, and then I'll move on. And she had accepted that. And so then it came time for him to move on. And she reached out to him and said, you know, in a sense, you've given me so much. You know, you've given me materially so much, but also I need you to give me spiritual guidance, you know, because, you know, what about all of the attachments that I have in life? And I know that attachments bring suffering. And unless I understand this more deeply, I won't understand how to free myself. Could you please give me that? And he expresses to her that your son, Kapila, he is an incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and he will fully inform you on these matters. And so that's the conversation that we have now. And it's a conversation, it's a conversation, you know, Bhagavatam's so important because it's clarifying all of Vyasadeva's teachings, those teachings that we find in the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Mahabharata and all that. It's kind of categorized here because we hear on so many different subjects. But in this particular Purana, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're going to hear about them all, like how to understand them in relation to each other and where they all lead. And so in this conversation, the different yogas are going to be discussed. It's going to discuss Jnana Yoga, it's going to discuss Ashtanga Yoga, it's going to discuss Bhakti-yoga, and how to understand all of them fully in context. So as this conversation begins, addressing Devahuti's fears, you know, of her attachments and how they may cause her suffering, it begins with Kapila making an interesting point, and that is that it's not attachments that are necessarily the problem. It's, as a matter of fact, it's quite natural for us to be attached to something. So the question is not should I or should I not be attached, but what is it that I'm attached to that makes all the difference? And he made the point that if you become attached to the sadhus, if you become attached to those holy people, to those deeply spiritual people, then that attachment counteracts material attachment and delivers one. It opens up the doors to liberation. And so then logically the next question would be, what is a sadhu? What are their characteristics? How do I recognize one? And that's what we heard yesterday in a very famous verse. This is the only verse that we read yesterday, text 21. The symptoms of a sadhu are that they are tolerant, merciful, and friendly to all living entities. They have no enemies. They're peaceful. They abide by the scriptures. And all of their characteristics are sublime. And so that's an often quoted verse. We hear that throughout, quoted often. Srila Prabhupada will quote that in his commentaries often and so on. Real important that it's not an external thing, but it's the internal qualities that we look for. Any thoughts on that verse, Jai Jagannath?
No, I do have some thoughts on that verse in relationship to the next one after it.
Okay.
But sure. I had a quick thought just about Devahuti's request to Kapila, because I believe the language is that you've given me so much, but you have not given me fearlessness.
Right.
And that quality of fearlessness is indicative of spiritual realization. The spiritual domain itself is said to be characterized by 3 dimensions of being, you can say. We normally hear it as Satchit Ananda. That's how we normally hear it.
Sure.
But in the Bhagavatam,
eternality, knowledge, and bliss.
Yeah, eternality, knowledge, and bliss. But how we hear it in the Bhagavatam is as Amrita Abhaya Kshema. So Amrita means immortality, which is Sat, the Sat principle. Mm-hmm. And Kshema, which means auspiciousness, refers to the Ananda principle. And then for the Chit principle, which is consciousness, the word that's used in the Bhagavatam is Abhaya. So fearlessness is considered one of the dimensions of spiritual being, like someone's really embodying spirituality in a realized level. Then fearlessness is the quality of consciousness that is intrinsic to that state of realization. So I just find it interesting that she uses that language, that you've given me so much, but you haven't given me fearlessness. And just in the context of what it means to be in the material world where you're threatened by literally death at every moment.
Sure.
And we've become more acutely aware of that than normal in recent times. I think it's an important idea of spirituality to understand that this quality is the gift of spiritual knowledge, of spiritual realization. the material world is itself called ekpa vibhuti, which means it's characterized only by one quality, which is death. And therefore there will be fear and there will be inauspiciousness. So no need to mention them separately. And so when Kapila is speaking to Devahuti, his teachings are meant to give the gift of fearlessness. Or said the other way, if we're really receiving the gift of spiritual wisdom as embodiment, then this should be something that comes up for us experientially, which is fearlessness. Otherwise, our whole movement in the material world is like more or less prompted by fear. We don't normally think about it, but it's like fear of, I have to survive, I have to be accepted, I shouldn't be rejected. There's so many fears underpinning or belying our movement in the material world. And so fearlessness is just like, I don't know, I've been resonating a lot with this word, fearlessness. Srila Prabhupada himself was called, Abhay was his birth name.
And yeah.
When he went to take initiation from his guru said, you already have a spiritual name, Abhay. And so anyway, so that was coming up for me, hearing your little recap.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting the way that you express it. You mentioned something. I just wanted to hear just a bit more about that. You said that the primary characteristic of the material world is death, or how did you phrase
that? You can say the main dimension of being in this material world is death. They call it ekpa vibhuti versus tripa vibhuti. So the tripa vibhuti we just described, immortality, fearlessness, and auspiciousness, right? So ekpa vibhuti means this material world, the basic dimension that governs it is death.
Okay, and that may sound.
It sounds a little morbid, but that's. I mean,
it sounds a little morbid. But there's truth, and again, like I think it was a couple weeks ago, Raghunath and I we're kind of on the subject for a while about how seeing the world through yogic knowledge, or seeing the world through the eyes of the Bhagavatam, it should grant one a material pessimism but a spiritual optimism. That's like the state, and I do think that's interesting, because we do try to ignore death or not think about death.
But it doesn't ignore us.
It does not ignore us, and it's happening around us like constantly all the time.
Right.
And so because we're so used to living in this world, it seems like it's taken for granted that the nature of life is death. It will come. But it's interesting to think of it from zoom out, see it from another perspective, that actually this idea of death is something that's very foreign to us. It's something very foreign to our true nature. And so from that perspective, you say, well, what is that world all about that we're living in? It's all about death. It's a world where this very unnatural thing is going on, where you have to die, and then it happens again and again and again. And liberation means freedom from that, back to one's original state. Very interesting. Okay. So why don't we read the next verse? We're up to text 22. The text 21 dealt with what could be called, it's interesting, and we can discuss this after we read the verse, but text 21, which had the tolerant and merciful and friendly to everyone and no enemies and peaceful and abiding by the scriptures, that these were the sadhubhushana, these were the characteristics of the sadhus. But those actually, they're the secondary characteristics. They kind of follow the primary characteristic.
You mean the ones that we're able to appreciate are secondary? Okay, I'm just putting that out there.
Sometimes it's like that. Some people might be able to appreciate. They might be more widely appreciated. But here, let's hear the primary characteristic here. Text 22. Such a sadhu engages in staunch devotional service to the Lord without deviation. For the sake of the Lord, they renounce all other connections, such as family relationships and friendly acquaintances within the world.
Doesn't sound as appreciable, but okay.
not as widely, perhaps. But it is, but I think when we really understand it, it will become appreciable. And in any case, let's hear your thoughts on that. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, my first thoughts went to this whole idea of secondary characteristics and primary characteristics. Yeah. So the primary characteristic, swarup lakshana, means that in all conditions, this quality will be manifest in all conditions. Whereas with the secondary characteristics, they may not always be manifest in all circumstances. All those characteristics you may not always see manifest in a sadhu, although they're present, but they manifest. It appears
he's intolerant right now.
Right, or it appears that he's not, he should say something. He's not saying something. And
right.
and so on. So those characteristics, the secondary characteristics means in all circumstances, they may not be manifest.
Okay.
Whereas in this Swarup Lakshana, it's intrinsic. So it's always manifest no matter what the condition is. So that's kind of the general like backdrop of primary and secondary characteristics. What I find interesting about the primary characteristics is that, well, the way my thoughts were going about is that it is a lot harder to appreciate the primary characteristic. You know, Dhrida Bhakti, so this like firm devotion on God with undeviating mind, Ananya Bhavena.
Ananya Bhavena, yeah.
You know, the mind is knowing no other. Ananya means like no other. There's no other object of his affection in his mind, so to speak. Of course, Krishna is not a normal person, so he includes all of the entities. So there's something to be said about just love directed at God. But in any case, as a result of that Ananya Bhavena, he gives up karmas, a fruit of activity, or, you know, goal-seeking material endeavors. And this last line specifically, he gives up swajana bandhushu. Swajana means like your own people, like your family members, for example. And bandhushu means like friends. So what's that all about? Like, this is a primary characteristic. This is like a glorification of the primary. So what was coming up for me reading that is that a true sadhu or like mystic in any tradition, it seems to me, from what I know of other traditions and certainly for our own, the true mystic is like both like a beacon and a burden for the conventional psyche. You know, obviously, particularly after he's dead, I'm sorry to say this, particularly after he's left the world, he becomes like a beacon of light, like he's embodying the highest ideal. It's very inspiring. But his life also presents somewhat of a burden to the conventional psyche, which is very much concerned about like friendship and family and social structures and that sort of stuff. And he's kind of like the outcast that's a little bit not in all cases, but not necessarily involved or even caring about those things. And so, yeah, this is what was kind of coming up for me, that these mystics are both like beacon and burden for the conventional psyche.
Interesting. You know, when you bring that up, when you where my thoughts go, in other words, this giving up tyakta, right there, just renouncing their karmic activities, which are commonly seen as the purpose of life. You know, let's work and get those good things in life, and even family relations and friendly acquaintances. It sounds, that you're what you're picturing here is a very cold world, maybe. But the way that I see it is a little different. It's actually, and this may be where it becomes appreciable. Understanding, like, let's get off the surface and try to go deeper into what this means. And really, what we're talking about, that ananya. When we say ananya, you know, it doesn't deviate. My mind is completely here. It's saying towards God, right? My mind is completely drawn towards God, without breaking. It's always going in that direction. So much so that family relations and friendly acquaintances have become less important, or even they may be challenges to that undeviating meditation or that undeviating thought. When we take that and then put it in another context, like the typical love story, you know, we glorify this when it's in the context of material love, right? And that's what we'll see in the works of Shakespeare and so on, right? Like, in other words, this love is so deep, you know, that Romeo is ready to give up his family. They're giving up, you know, they have these strong trends in their family that, like, their families are enemies with one another, right? And then we see that same, because that is such a fundamental, it seems like, you know, Shakespeare's like catching on to something very fundamental about the nature of love. So it's being repeated in other stories, right down to like West Side Story and everything, right? You know, you got like the Puerto Ricans on one side and the Irish and, you know, or Italians or whatever they were on the other side, you know, and one of them's coming from one family or community and the other's coming from the other community, which are enemies. But for the sake of love, they give all that up, right? Even family, because the love is so strong and so deep and so pure. And so that's the nature of the sadhu, right? Is that their love for God is so strong and real and deep and glorious that the things of this world, even those deepest connections, they're ready to drop them in a moment, for the sake of pure love, right? So yeah, so let's
I
let's
find
think.
that I
Yeah,
do find that attractive as you're
yeah,
describing it, but I'm also thinking about it from the perspective of a person who's getting left behind. Like
yeah,
my experience, like for example, my experience in joining like a Hare Krishna movement, for example, and I became, in the beginning stages, I was quite cold to my mother, something I
sure,
regret now, but in the zeal of being young and idealistic and foolish, I became very cold towards my mother. I became very um I cut off most of my friendships. Of course, I was 18, so let's be real, they were gonna be lost anyway. You know,
you're running, you're
we're
gonna
like
run in some
we're all
direction.
going in our different directions.
Yeah,
So, but I remember specifically writing a letter to all my friends, email, talking about the glories of Vaikuntha. I can't.
right.
And that was kind of like the end of those relationships. And it was something that, you know, hearing something like this, I was initially like, yeah, I'm a devotee, you know, and something worthy of to be proud of, that
Yeah,
those relationships got smashed. And later on, now I'm not much more mature. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit more mature though. I'm going to give myself some credit.
okay.
I do see it as, well, I can understand how someone could read this and find it to be problematic. And I'm as you described it, it's beautiful, and I think there's more to be said on this.
Hmm.
But I'm also thinking about it from the perspective of those who get left behind, or from the perspective of those who see us coming to devotion and see how it's transforming us, maybe positively, but also transforming us to the point where we're like, yeah, I'm leaving you behind because it's about love of God.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, there's more and less mature ways to approach one's, spiritual practice, or and I remember you're bringing that up reminds me. It was a month or two ago, a little while, a couple of months ago, probably. Who was it, Mara, that we had on that? Who was it that was out on the beach, and they were with their family?
Oh, AJ Sullivan, I think.
What was it? AJ? Was
I
it
think
AJ? Okay,
so.
yeah. Okay, so it was AJ. I was thinking, and so he was describing how he's become involved with the devotees on one hand, but his family doesn't even know about it. And then he was out like on the beach with his family, and then like all the devotees came up doing the Harinam, and they kind of like pulled him right away from his family or something like that. And how do I explain all this? No, it wasn't AJ. AJ was mentioned, but it was a woman, wasn't it?
Oh, well, there's also Sherry Sobensinski who went
It
on
was it Sherry. It
Harinam.
was Sherry. I think it
I
was
think you're
Sherry, right?
confusing the two stories,
Okay,
because I
maybe I'm
think
mixing
they
up the
both came out around
stories.
the same
But in
time.
any case, I remember back when we were talking about that, I remember thinking, I'm at a point in my life right now where there's not one person on earth that, like, if they walk up and see me like chanting Hare Krishna in the street, where I'm like, oh no, like, I feel any sense of embarrassment or concern that they won't understand what I'm doing, and this is, I don't have two worlds that conflict anymore, you
Mm.
know, and so I think this might be something like that too. When we're new to it, we're thinking, well, I have to step out of one world to enter into the other world, and when it matures, we can be in that devotional world and even move through the other world kind of like relatively gracefully, so that like I may, in one sense, I may have even renounced the type of attachment or the type of association that I used to have with my family. But it doesn't mean I've turned my back on them or walked away from them. Or I still may sit at the table with them. I still may talk with them, spend time with them, love them, share what I can with them. But internally, I'm I'm I've renounced what was not beneficial from that,
Mm.
right? I've renounced whatever might muddle or dilute my uh, growing, attachment to God. And
Mm.
so in this way, we've kind of let it go, but at the same time, haven't like just, slammed the door on him and said
Yeah,
later.
that was my reconciliation to. I have a song here from Bhakti-yogi Thakur
Oh yeah,
that I think could reconcile this apparent tension. But just commenting quickly on what you just said, that
yeah,
was how I kind of reconciled it also.
yeah.
Later on, we'll hear in Kapila Dev's teachings in chapter 29, he'll speak about this word, he'll use this word, pritak bhava, which means like separateness feeling. And this word separateness feeling means that nothing can actually be separate from God. There's nothing outside of God. If God is an infinite reality, there could be no existence outside of God. And therefore, there's only a sense of separateness from God. There's no actual separateness. So he uses this term pritak bhava. Am I still okay? Am I being heard okay? I think we were losing Kaustubha a little bit, or am I being lost?
No, you're good. I can still hear you.
Okay, cool. So there's only the feeling of being separate. It's just like the way that Gaudiya Vaishnava was presented. You have the fire and then you have the heat coming from the fire. So if God is like the fire, then all life is like the heat. And you cannot have fire without heat. So there's no question of having fire on one side and heat on another side. They're always together or related. So there can only be a sense of separateness from God, no actual separateness. And therefore, yeah, the way I kind of was taking these verses, ananya bhavena, my mind knows no other, means that he's conquered over this separateness feeling, which is the main dilemma of the conditioned soul in this world that's presented by the Bhagavatam. He's conquered over that. So he looks at family, he looks at the world, but he doesn't look at it with separateness anymore, as like something separate from God, you know, with separate desires to be pursued separately. When I was growing up, I remember my relationship with God was like this. I always believed in God, but I'm like, God is in his world doing his thing, and I'm in my world doing my thing. He should stay over in his lane, and I'll stay in my lane. That was kind of my understanding, betraying my pritak bhava, my separateness feeling. So the devotees conquered over that. So his mind knows no other. So even when relating to family members, to the society and so on, he relates to it without separateness feeling. And therefore his relation to it becomes most wholesome or most complete. And if I had to sell that point, I would sell it in this way. Although I think there are instances where such a person can just like cut things off also. But to make it, to show that it is also attractive, I think this would be a good selling point. Kaustubha, do we have you back? Are you back with us? Is it okay? Okay.
I think he's having trouble with his computer still.
Okay. Well, is it okay if I share this little song that sort of demonstrates this? I'm just going to read the translation. Please. From one of our preceptors, Bhakti-yogi Thakur. So he writes here, so Bhakti-yogi Thakur, just for a quick background information, he was a householder for most of his life. So he had family and he had a lot of kids, like 10 plus, like he had a lot of kids. So he has, he's a prolific writer of Bhakti literatures, whilst managing his family life. And he was also a prolific judge, magistrate at one point. So he was like very much involved in the world, but without separateness feeling. So I wanted to share this prayer as a demonstration of how that might look, to be involved without separateness feeling. So he writes here, just reading the translation of this little short prayer: mind, body, and family, whatever may be mine, I have surrendered at your lotus feet, O youthful son of Nanda. In good fortune or in bad, in life or at death, all my difficulties have disappeared by choosing those feet of yours as my only shelter. Slay me or protect me as you wish, for you are the master of your eternal servant. It is your will that I be born again. If it is your will that I be born again, then may it be in the home of your devotee. May I be born again even as a worm, so long as I may remain your devotee. I have no desire to be born as Brahma, averse to you. Brahma is like the highest position in the universe. I yearn for the company of that devotee who is completely devoid of all desire for worldly enjoyment or liberation. Father, mother, lover, son, Lord, preceptor, and husband, you are everything to me. Thakur Bhaktivinoda says, O Kana, please hear me. O Lord of Radha, you are my life and soul. So I thought that was a sweet, beautiful prayer that demonstrates how one can be very much related in this world, but without pritak bhava, without the feeling of being separate from God, which is the main Maya that afflicts us. So yeah, beautiful prayer, very famous. The prayer is called Manasa Deho Geho. It comes from a song book of Thakur Bhaktivinoda called Sharanagati, which means surrender. It's a book of many prayers speaking about surrender to God. So very beautiful. This was a really good example of this idea. And then I think that makes it more attractive, right? It's like a lot more attractive than like, hey, I'm God conscious, bye. this is like, no, there's still relation, but without separateness feeling. I don't look at you as someone separate from God that's meant for my consumption, for my enjoyment, for my exploitation. No, you are also part of God. And I clearly see that. So my relation to you will be wholesome and beautiful. I thought if I had to sell it, I would try to sell it in this way. Did I do a good job?
I think you did a great job. Kaustubha, are you back with us?
Yeah, Kaustubha. I'm already scared to be on the show. Now I'm like left behind. I'm like, come on. It's too much pressure.
You're doing great. You're doing great. The only time Kaustubha ever has computer problems is when Raghu's not on the show.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's like a sign. We can do backup every now and again, but not too much. I don't know. Am I supposed to like hold the space now?
Keep going.
Okay. Well, so this is anyway, so that's our kind of like our discussion of the primary characteristics of the sadhu. I also like to mention that if you think of the dynamic between a collective and the individual, there's always a tension between these two. No matter what institutions you involve yourself with, there's always going to be a tension between the collective and the individual. I know, being a part of like my spiritual community, a lot of our complaints are about how the collective is not being responsive to the needs of the individual. Or some. Okay, Kaustubha, you're back on the.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. You've been doing a great job, by the way. I don't know what happened. My computer freaked out, and so I'm back. But I caught a lot of what you said.
Okay.
And I appreciated it about the Manasadeho Geho.
Yes.
Sorry about that, man. You did a great job. We needed you. You came through. I was singing another song about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, though. I forget which song it is, but it has this line. It was so heavy, this line, where it's one of those songs that he's writing about material life, and he's looking back, and he's left it behind. And he says this phrase. He says, and when I look back at my family and friends, all I see is a list of names. Do you know that one?
I don't know that, but that's the less attractive aspect.
Yeah, that's the other side, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's the other side. But that's also very interesting because that's cold Gyannic. That's like a cold Gyannic viewpoint, right? That hey, I've been born in this family right now and in this circumstance in a particular community. It's time bound. It comes, it goes. I was born in a previous family, in my previous life, I was born in another family, and previous to that in a different one still. And every time I find myself in the illusion that this is who I am and these are my people. This is my family. I see it as almost like an absolute fact, rather than viewing it as a relative fact, rather than zooming out and viewing it from a distance and saying, hey, we're all doing this. We're all switching families and we're all switching communities, like birth after birth after birth. Particularly if that family or friends or community had no interest in connecting deeply with God. Then I move on. And when I look back at the past, and this may sound cold, but there's some truth in it. And there's not just some truth in it, but like there's something liberating about it to be able to say, my relationship with every living being is just as real and just as important. It kind of broadening one's
oh my God, yes,
the level of one's relationships, right? In other words, the affection that I had for a small community of people, it's not even necessarily that I'm turning my back and spitting on that or something like that, but I recognize the broadening of my affection, that I could see every living being as a friend, is actually closer to truth.
Can I amplify that with something from first canto? I was thinking of this as you were speaking. So there's this Queen Kunti's stuti, where she is praying to Krishna, very famous first prayers of the Bhagavatam, absolutely beautiful. She's the one who's famous for saying, may the calamities come again and again. because I can
Sure.
think of you. Like, not going to offer that prayer, but I do appreciate your mood. But that's going to be a no for me in terms of me offering prayers to God.
Not quite ready for the calamity prayer.
Right. But at the end of these prayers, she says this particular thing, Sneha Pashamimam Chindi, Dridam Panushu Vishnishu. So she's praying to Krishna to cut off the Sneha Pasham, the rope of affection, tying her to her family members. And that brings up a question, because all her family members are pure bhaktas of the Lord that we're hearing in Kapila Dev's teachings that we should be attached to. Right. And now she's saying, cut that off. And so anyway, the way our commentators reconcile that to say, well, we relate even to the bhaktas kind of in two parts, one that's like more empirical and one that's more like spiritual. So she's asking to have that empirical part cut off because it's limiting the flow of affection toward the greater family. And this is the part I wanted to amplify. So Prabhupada writes in his purport to this verse, which is very inspirational for me. He says here, I'm just reading, he says, a pure devotee cuts off the limited ties of affection for his family and widens his activities of devotional service for all forgotten souls.
Nice.
And the typical example is the band of the Goswamis who follow the path of Lord Chaitanya. All of them belong to the most enlightened and culture-rich families of the higher caste, but for the benefit of the massive population, they left their comfortable homes and became mendicants. To cut off all family affection means to broaden the field of activities. Without doing this, no one can be qualified as a brahmana, a king, a public leader, or a devotee of the Lord. I find that to be a very powerful statement. Like, yeah, public leaders, like, I know your family is important to you, but now you're serving the greater family. It's a challenge. Really important. Yeah.
It's very challenging. It's that we don't fall into leaders don't fall into patterns of nepotism and so on. It's nearly impossible, for them, or they'll be faced with great challenges, like where that gets brought right up to the forefront, right? Beautiful, beautiful commentary. Thank you for that. I don't have my screen up or anything like that, but I assume that you do.
I do.
Would you like to read the next verse?
Sure. Next verse says, Madashaya kata mrishta shrinvanti kantayanti cha tapanti vividastapa naitamagata chetasa. Engage constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The sadhus do not suffer from material miseries. Okay, because they are always filled with thoughts of my pastimes and activities.
There's the answer to a problem, I suppose, right? Somehow this perspective, or this isn't a cheap thing. It sounds almost like it's being said, it almost sounds too simple, right? Will you turn your attention to this and then you won't suffer materially anymore? And then, so I suppose one might ask, well, okay, but what happens when, X, Y, or Z happens? What happens when, your car crashes? What happens when you get sick? What happens when you lose a loved one? What happens when you lose your job? You're telling me that those things aren't suffering. What would your answer to that be?
They're definitely suffering for me and probably suffering for you, but that's because of our absorption. And here this saying they're absorbed as sort of like a different reality altogether. And so it's not suffering for them. I mean, you can play around with this word suffering, like what does it mean to really suffer and so on. But what's being indicated here when I was reading it is that all experience is more or less psychological. Although you're having like a gross circumstance is happening to you, the way that you experience it and process it is largely psychological. It's taking place in the mind. And so here, this devotee's mind is absorbed in this transcendent reality. And so even when external things appear to be very miserable or suffering, they're not processing it or experiencing it as such because of the level of their absorption. Just to give a practical way of thinking about this, when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, we were told to see like all conditions in life, including our suffering, as the mercy of God. Now, that could be problematic for certain people when you try to think about that in certain scenarios. But let's just try to imagine it just as a working theory. If you honestly saw every situation in life as God's mercy, that's going to very much transform how you experience that situation. You're not going to really be experiencing it as suffering anymore in the conventional or empirical sense of suffering, because now it's God's mercy. It's meant to teach me something. It's meant to help me grow in a particular way, whatever it is, but it's God's mercy. And so just as a working theory, if someone honestly, like on a visceral level, saw all happenings in their life as God's hand to help increase their devotion and to increase their humility and eagerness for the absolute reality or whatever it is, all these points are talking points in the Bhagavad, then you're not going to experience the world in the same way that a conventional mind caught up in identification with the world of matter is going to be experiencing it. So that's kind of how I was taking and understand this reality. They're free from all miseries doesn't mean the conditions of the death world, as we already described, aren't upon them, but rather they don't experience it in the same way a conventional mind experiences because of their absorption in God's grace.
And I imagine that absorption, that we could call it that knowledge or that understanding.
Sure.
That it's multifaceted. Like that part of it may be, you see, like we hear in the commentary towards the end, Srila Prabhupada writes, I got my computer screen back up. He says, ordinary conditioned souls, being forgetful of the activities of the Lord, are always full of anxieties and material tribulations. On the other hand, since the devotee is always engaged in the topics of the Lord, they are forgetful of the miseries of material existence. So the mind's going to be engaged in one thing or the other. And this, again, when I read that, I could see it almost sounding too simple, like, hold it, there are these stories, you hear those stories, and somehow all your pain in life goes away.
And don't knock it until you try it.
But I think, part of it is, there's the Jnanic aspect to it. Like, in other words, I can recategorize what I'm going through. I can analyze it in a different way. And when the conviction becomes strong enough, what was fearful in the past, we were speaking about fear earlier, what was fearful in the past, or the attachments that I had that would make me feel like, oh no, this is terrible, I don't see it in that way anymore. So I'm not suffering the way that I used to suffer, right? It's like, okay, I can let go of that. I don't need that to be happy. My happiness is not tied to this automobile. My happiness is not tied to this job. Even that relationship, I thought it was all about that. I thought my happiness was all about that relationship. I realized that my happiness isn't tied to that. And there's a growing sense, arising in me that I have another relationship, right? That nothing can shake. And that's my relationship with God. And in the beginning, it's more theoretical, but then the challenges in life are giving me an opportunity to reflect on this and that conviction to grow. Okay. So in a sense, that's even right there, we have some truth to this, right? Because I'm hearing this, my miseries are disappearing. They haven't exactly disappeared yet, but I cross over them with a greater ease than I would have crossed over them before by Krishna's mercy. But then I believe that there's another far deeper kind of state of spiritual awareness where that
there's
love,
literally no misery,
where there is no, where it really doesn't matter what I'm, you look at Prahlad, we're going to hear about Prahlad, in the 7th canto, who's just like, he's going through torturous circumstances brought on by his father, who's supposed to be his protector and most loving, caring person in life. And that person is actually out to kill him in all kind of horrible ways. And it doesn't matter what they do, right? His love for God is so strong that absolutely nothing shake him. He's actually not even experiencing any misery at all. And so that's like a far deeper,
kind of realization, but that we shouldn't think is fiction or mythological, but that or even unavailable to us, but that we can actually think that it's not so far away. If if I gain the mercy of the devotees and gain the mercy of Krishna, even those most those greatest gems of all, will be granted.
Yeah, for me, it seems like it depends on what you want. A lot of hearing scripture is to inform us of the possibilities within awareness. And now what you want, like we allow our desires to be fettered to the conventional world. And therefore it's like we don't give ourselves permission to even desire such a possibility within awareness. So Shastra is manifesting, saying, hey, this is a possibility with an awareness. Are you brave enough to desire this and to take your life to that fullest extent by which you can actually experience? Or are you going to allow your desire to be, fettered to conventional world and the miseries that come along with that relationship, Hridaya Granthi, that knot in the heart? Everything's just about this world. So that the possibility is there. We have to give ourselves the permission to desire it. And then your desire will take you there.
Yeah, when I speak publicly, a lot of times I start there by saying that this yoga, all this yoga philosophy and so on, these stories that we're reading about these souls that had achieved these great states, that we may be prone to thinking like that was for someone else. That was for someone else in a different world. That wasn't from someone in the world that I've lived in, who's lived the life that I've lived, who's got the problems that I have. It's nice to hear about it. Maybe even hearing about it can improve my life, right. But that's unavailable to me. Or even if someone's like a little bit deeper into it, it's unavailable to me in this life. It's something that maybe many lifetimes from now I'll take birth in a way that's a possibility or something like that. But I feel the calling or the encouragement from the great souls, from Srila Prabhupada and his commentaries, and from other great saints in our tradition, to say, don't think like that. Right. In one sense, it's important that we understand just how distracted we've become, or how severed we've allowed our relationship with God and the devotees and with reality to become. But from the other side, we should realize we should have faith in the strength of Krishna's mercy, the power of the holy name, the softness of Krishna's heart, and his eagerness to overlook our shortcomings and pull us back. And so then okay, well, let's have faith in that, and let's believe that anything's possible. It may even happen quicker than
There's this phrase from Joseph Campbell that I like. It's just a short little, it's part of a longer sentence, which I don't remember, but this phrase comes up: follow your bliss. Such bliss is an actual possibility within awareness, and we need only follow it and not self-sabotage what this limiting belief that, it's not possible. If it wasn't possible, then these mystics wouldn't be talking to us about it. They're talking to us about it to say, like, yo, look at what I discovered. You can also have this. Like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's really meant as an encouragement to follow your bliss. Like, all souls have that potential. We need only have the courage to follow it. And obviously there's implications in following your bliss. You have to give up suffering. That's the implication. And it's like a really weird psychological thing that we're attached to the sources of misery. It's something like that's really weird that happens in the material world.
What do they call that? Stockholm syndrome or something like that?
Yeah, it's totally like that. It's like 100%. I know there are certain things in my life that are causing me misery. And if someone's like, well, why don't you just give it up? I'm like, no. I can't. Like, it could be something like even the phone. Like, let's be real, for a lot of us, the phone has definitely decreased the quality of existence by a few degrees. And someone's like, well, why don't you just give it up? Of course, there's practical reasons, but even if those practical reasons weren't there, we would probably be like,
we're still stuck.
So we're attached to the sources of misery, and therefore we're not giving ourselves permission to follow our bliss. So I just really love this phrase, follow your bliss. Like, it takes courage to do so. There are definitely consequences of doing so, but we should have the courage to do so. I just wanted to end with this one little story. I know this person personally. I was on the 24-hour kirtan party in Vrndavan. I was going for several consecutive years. And one of the devotees that I was on the party with, his name was Radheshan Vilas. Russian guy. Well, no one actually knew if he was like Russian, Canadian, or Canadian. Like, he was a little bit of a mystery. He threw his passport out because he didn't want to leave Vrindavan.
Okay. That's one way, I suppose.
Yeah, he was not the easiest person to deal with, but he somehow liked me, so we got along well. Anyway, fast forward a few years, India's government starts cracking down on like illegals in their country. So they hit ISKCON Vrindavan very hard because they have a lot of devotees from Bangladesh and other places just like posting up. And Radheshan Vilas gets arrested and sent to the mature prison. Now, the mature prisons in India are, let's just say, you don't want to go to the prison in India. It's really the ghetto. And he gets arrested. He's sent to prison, and they're asking him for his identification so they can deport him. He won't tell them what his identification is because he doesn't want to leave Vrindavan. So he refuses to tell them, so they get people locked up in prison. Fast forward 3 years later to the present, some devotees are going to visit Radheshan Vilas, and he's talking about his life in prison is the happiest he's ever been.
Really?
Yes, this is a true story. I'm not even making this up. He said, this is the happiest I've ever been. So they're asking for expert. How is that possible? He says, I'm able to chant 64 rounds every day and hear and read Krishna Katha all day, and I get to stay in Vrindavan. I refuse to leave Vrindavan. That's my desire, to be here. And I'm feeling completely blissful. Someone shared the video, this is about 2 weeks ago, someone shared the video on Instagram where for Janmashtami festival, he got the whole prison to have a Janmashtami celebration. All the cops like him, and they let him lead a Janmashtami celebration in the prison. So you can see the video of people in the prison chanting and dancing. He's like on the stage leading the kirtan. And that's just like a contemporary example of like, wow, okay, the relationship with God is available everywhere, including prison. And for a person who's able to follow their bliss and actualize that potential, just they can bring healing to even a prison, what to speak of the rest of the world. Anyway, so I just thought that was a really good example to share in this regard, of a contemporary person that I actually personally know, I actually spent time with, but I never guessed that he would follow his bliss to this extreme. But it's very beautiful, and I'm encouraging.
Yeah, what others would consider the most miserable condition possible.
Prison in India. I'm not American where they feed you nicely and all that. In India is wild.
Right. Unbelievable. Thank you for sharing that, Jai Jagannath. It's been great having you here. We may be calling on you in later on in the week, so please stick with us. It was great.
Thank you.
Great hearing from you, and thanks for the heroics and keeping the thing going when my computer was freaking out.
I was scared, but thank you for having me.
Okay. Mara, do we have any takeaways?
We do have some takeaways. Evolution of inquiry precedes evolution of being.
Boom. That's like the big one. Okay.
Your questions determine your trajectory. The basic dimension of the material world is death.
Okay.
Sadhus are both beacon and burden for conventional psyche.
True.
Renounce what might dilute your attachment to God.
Sounds like good advice.
Yeah. Bhakti should broaden your affection for all.
Nice.
Spiritual wisdom leads to fearlessness. Have faith in Krishna's
stuff.
have faith in Krishna's eagerness to overlook our shortcomings. Have the courage to give up suffering and follow your bliss. Prison in Vrindavan is better than freedom in Maya.
Love the last one.
Very good. Thank you, Mara. Thank you, Jai Jagannath. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. And I'll try to cue up the music. I think I got it here.
You got it? All right.
For some reason it's not playing here. It may have something to do.
A lot of technical difficulties today.
I'm all messed up technically today. Mara, do you have the music?
I do. Tell me if you can hear it.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Maybe a little closer. There you go. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Hopefully Raghunath will be like on the mend and be back with us for good soon. but he may be here tomorrow. He may not be. We'll be here one way or the other. We're going to keep the thing going. Anything else was I supposed to mention? I can't think of anything.
Kali, Colombia?
Kali, Colombia. We're going to do our retreat in Kali, Colombia, which I think starts on the 9th of January. But if you would like to get more, pretty soon we're going to like release all the information officially and all that. But if you want to get it even sooner, want to find out more, you write to wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com, and Meryl will take care of you. Okay?